Thank you. All right. Hi, my name is Maggie McDaris. Judith, thank you for the introduction. I am the CEO and founder of Phase. As she mentioned, Phase is really the first productivity tool built for women, built with our natural rhythms in mind. I'm going to walk through sort of the 101 of, I will use the term, Yana, cycle syncing, your work. That being said, we also have a resources list at the end of it. So if anyone is interested in that, I will make sure, send an email. I'll make sure you can access it to know that everything I'll be talking about today is evidence-backed and also fully endorsed by our clinical team, which includes neuroendocrinologist, psychiatrist, women's health specialist, OBGYNs, and I also have a background in wellness and well-being. So as I'm speaking to that, my background is in wellness. Originally, I was a registered dietitian, started my career in public health, corporate wellness. I'm a corporate wellness specialist, and then transitioned into startup strategy, really helping businesses understand and translate wellness expertise and wellness value into impactful and revenue-generating solutions. I also don't have a clicker. I just realized this is a remote control. That's okay. Okay, great. So today I'm here to talk to you about how we apply the concept of cycle syncing to your work, specifically looking at the cognitive shifts that occur across the menstrual cycle and how to leverage them for productivity. I'm also going to spend a little bit of time discussing why this is important, especially in the context of conversations around longevity and what we need to do to continue to move that conversation forward. So let's dive into what happens cognitively during each phase of the cycle and what that means for productivity. I'm going to go a bit out of order here. I'm actually going to start with the follicular phase. And that's because periods get a lot of talk and attention. I'm going to make them wait till they're last. So for those who don't know, the follicular phase occurs right after menstruation, roughly days 6 to 13 of your cycle. At this time, most sex hormones are rising from the lowest levels that they've been experiencing throughout the month, with estrogen in particular increasing steeply and peaking at the end of this phase. That rise in estrogen is what is responsible for many of the cognitive and emotional and energetic shifts that people might feel as they come out of their period. One of the most noticeable changes in your follicular phase is going to be an increase in energy, both physical energy and mental energy, so your ability to do a lot of tasks for a long period of time. As estrogen rises also, so does dopamine production and dopamine receptor sensitivity. What this means is that in addition to more energy, you also are more easily able to access motivation. Your reward systems are pinging. Estrogen's impact on the prefrontal cortex and on the hippocampus support big picture thinking. So cognitive flexibility, the ability to take in a lot of information at once and draw conclusions, making this a really ideal phase for strategy, for innovation, for expansive thinking. I like to call it 40,000-foot perspective. During your follicular phase, you are also more resilient to stress, both emotionally and physically. So high output days, days where you have stacked meetings, days where you're traveling, tend to take less of a toll on your mental and physical symptoms. So in terms of work, that means the follicular phase is a really great time to engage in strategic planning, to engage in creative activities. So whether that's innovation and brainstorming or creative problem solving, it's a really good time to take on work-related travel, to take on really busy seasons, to take on really high-pressure events or seasons. It's also a really good time to start things because motivation is so easily accessed. It's a great time to launch projects, to launch pilots. I kind of like to think of the follicular phase, it's why I started with it, as the on-ramp to the rest of the month. You can really build some momentum, you can lay some groundwork, you can set yourself up for success for some times in the month where you're going to be a little more inward and a little more execution focused. So after the follicular phase, you hit ovulation. And any health professionals are going to be like, it's not a phase. I know, it's a moment in time. Ovulation is a single moment when your body releases an egg. However, the few days leading up to it are characterized by peaking estrogen. This is when estrogen is the highest that it is any other time of the month. The other thing that happens here is actually a notable spike in testosterone. And that's really important because those two in combination create a really lovely and potent neurochemical cocktail. And it's a great environment for communication and confidence and social connection. Testosterone in particular supports an increase in verbal fluency and verbal memory. The ovulatory levels of estrogen that are happening at the same time increase your sensitivity to social cues and to emotional awareness. As a result, you might find it easier to find the right words, to communicate and articulate ideas clearly, and to read the room, to tailor your message for different audiences and kind of gauge how people are responding to what you're saying. So in a work context, that means the ovulation phase is ideal for delivering presentations and pitches. It's great for business development initiatives, cold calling, networking. It's really good for leading team conversations, even hard conversations like, say, performance reviews. It's great for negotiating. It's just really good for sort of high power, high visibility moves. This is definitely a phase that you want to kind of highlight on your calendar every month so that you can maximize it. Now, following the ovulation moment comes the luteal phase, and I am on a mission to rebrand the luteal phase. It is actually my favorite phase of the cycle, justice for the luteal phase. I think it's been deeply misunderstood. And by that, I mean the luteal phase is often kind of characterized by what happens in the late luteal phase. This is when people are experiencing really low energy. It's when they're experiencing PMS symptoms. As you can see on the graph here, the luteal phase is actually quite a bell curve, and that top bell is progesterone. And progesterone is really interesting when it comes to cognition. So I just want to know that as we talk about the luteal phase, we really can't paint it with a broad brush, and we have to sort of break it up into chunks. So as I mentioned, it's hormonally distinct. It's marked by progesterone reaching its highest points throughout the month. And progesterone enhances activation in your prefrontal cortex and your temporal lobes. If you're familiar with the prefrontal cortex, I always make the joke if teenagers make bad choices, I'm like, prefrontal cortex, not developed. It's really good for judgment and decision-making and deliberate thinking. As progesterone rises also, the amygdala becomes more reactive to emotional stimuli. Everyone's like, I know. Making you more attuned and, yes, sometimes more sensitive to your internal and external environment. While this, yes, can lead to emotional reactivity, it also supports better judgment, particularly in, I would say, emotionally nuanced or ethically complex decisions. The luteal phase can also be really productive in terms of getting through a to-do list. Your brain is craving those dopamine hits that were way more readily available a couple weeks ago. So finishing tasks, doing sort of small administrative things, crossing things off of your to-do list feels especially good. So in that sort of mid-luteal phase, it's a really good time for evaluating, for making gut-driven, intuitive-driven decisions. It's good for tackling detail-oriented administrative tasks, so things like budgeting and reporting and catching up on your inbox and documentation. And it's also a really good time to kind of tick off those things on your to-do list that have been lingering for a little bit too long, because that, dopamine reward is going to feel extra special this time of the month. It is also a good time to prioritize structure and routine because that motivation is less readily available to you. Then, as the luteal phase wraps up, things start to shift. It's time to start to prepare for the menstrual phase. The menstrual phase being the start of your cycle, actually, and when your bleeding begins. This is when estrogen and progesterone are at their lowest levels, which corresponds in a dip in energy, motivation, and concentration. Before I dive in to what is happening in your brain during the menstrual phase, I'm going to put this caveat on here. I sat right there and I sat down when Yana was, reading off these symptoms. I know and acknowledge that for many women, I would say probably the majority of women and people who menstruate, that the lived experience of this phase includes pain and fatigue. I have closed deals with blood trickling down my leg. It means low energy. It means debilitating cramps while having to be on a Zoom call. I do not want to ever diminish the real impact that those have on a workday and your ability to show up and be productive. So I want to make sure we put that caveat out there. That being said, I'm a big believer that as we research ways to help women manage their symptoms and hopefully research ways to solve the root causes of those problems, I also believe we should be researching ways we optimize these hormonal shifts. That kind of biohacking optimization science does not have to come after the health science, but can sit next to it. I'll get off that soapbox. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some of the interesting cognitive shifts that happen during this phase. So one is an increase in gray matter density in the left inferior parietal lobe. You don't have to remember that. There won't be a quiz, but this is the part of the brain involved in distinguishing between perspectives, in establishing nuance in information, and in recalling past experiences, so things like episodic memory. Additionally, what's happening right now is the left and right sides of your brain are communicating more efficiently than at any other time of the month. So that parietal lobe activation plus the cross-brain integration is supporting not only reflection and nuanced insight, but also the ability to take that insight and turn it into really impactful action. That means that the menstrual phase is really good for auditing things, for looking at processes and systems and projects, doing postmortems, evaluating what's working, what's not working, is there something we can change? The other thing that's really great about the menstrual phase is you're primed for detail-oriented tasks. So maybe not starting something new, but look at things that are already ongoing and finding ways to tweak and improve. The menstrual phase is a quiet but very productive season in your brain. And I love that because that sits really well next to a season where maybe you're experiencing physical symptoms and low physical energy, where you're needing to physically rest. So, our body to some degree knows what it's doing there. So why does this matter for longevity? The first thing I want to mention is that I acknowledge no one has 100% control or autonomy over their calendar, over their tasks. I myself have a 3.5-year-old. She owns a lot of those things right now. But small shifts, small realignments, doing things during the phases when we are biologically primed to do those things can lead to better productivity, better health, and better resilience. And that is important because chronic stress is one of the biggest predictors of long-term health decline. It contributes to cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, hormonal disruption, immune disruption, premature aging. For women, that stress is so often shaped by how our biology intersects with the demands of modern life. Women today are facing unprecedented burnout. Women in the workplace are 1.5 times more likely to burn out than their male counterparts. 43% of women in management and leadership positions report chronic stress and chronic exhaustion, compared to only 31% in their male counterparts. And 81% of women say that their menstrual cycle interferes with their ability to be productive at work. And yet the way we are trying to solve this right now is by asking women to manage it better, to continue to show up 9 to 5, conform to the rigid structure of that workday, and work in a way that does not really reflect the reality of our biology. And this mismatch between biological rhythms and professional expectations creates a misalignment that results in cumulative stress, depleted nervous system resilience, and long-term wear and tear on our physical and emotional health. The truth is, if we want women to thrive into their 60s and 70s and 80s and beyond and live joyful, healthful lives, we have got to stop burning them out in their 30s and 40s. And this is one way we can do that. So what else can we do? First, we've got to continue investing in education and empowering women to understand their cycles. I am probably talking to a fairly cycle-literate group of people, but most women still couldn't tell you what a luteal phase was. They couldn't identify when they are ovulating, let alone understand how that's impacting how they show up at work or how they show up at home. A recent study we did at Phase with the University of Greenwich found a statistically significant link between simply using a tracking app and improved perceptions of productivity and career satisfaction. That being said, we cannot stop at education only. We need to be education first, not education alone. Here's another public health soapbox of mine. Education alone puts the burden back on women to continue to solve our own problems. True change requires changing systems, changing environments, and providing tools. And by tools, I don't just mean another webinar or another PDF. Women need tools like Phase, tools that embed hormonal insights into the places where we already exist, where we are already working. That means our desktops, our calendars, our browsers, our inboxes. Tools that help women work smarter without asking them to do more. If we can build these systems that work with our biology, we can create a version of productivity that is sustainable for women and a future where women can thrive across every decade of life.